In today's rapidly changing world, power shifts are happening faster than ever before, and what we are witnessing right now in Beijing could shape the future of global politics for decades. Kim Jong Un arriving in Beijing and joining the discussions between Russia, China, and India has triggered headlines worldwide, and many are calling it a historic alignment. On the other side of this development stands the United States, with Trump at the center of the storm, facing what looks like coordinated global pushback from some of the world's most influential leaders. To truly understand the significance of this gathering, we need to carefully break down the reasons behind it, the symbolism of Kim's presence, the common goals of these nations, and what it means for Muslims across the globe who are often caught in the middle of great power politics. At first glance, this meeting looks like a high-level photo opportunity, but beneath the surface, it is much more than that. The Beijing meeting symbolizes a shift from a unipolar world dominated by the United States toward a multipolar order where nations like Russia, China, India, and even North Korea want a larger say in global affairs. For decades, the U.S. has used its influence, military bases, and economic policies to steer international politics. But now countries who have felt sidelined or pressured by American policies are finding common ground. The fact that Kim Jong Un, a leader long treated as an isolated figure, is now welcomed in such a high-profile gathering shows just how much the balance of power is tilting. Why is Kim Jong Un's participation important? North Korea has always been portrayed in Western media as a rogue state, unpredictable and dangerous. But for Russia and China, North Korea is more than just a neighbor, it's a strategic partner. By bringing Kim to the table, Beijing and Moscow are signaling that they are willing to defy Washington's yes narrative and give legitimacy to leaders who resist American dominance. For Kim himself, this is a golden opportunity to break out of isolation, demonstrate that he has powerful friends, and strengthen his bargaining power not only against the U.S., but also with South Korea, Japan, and the broader international community. Now let's talk about why India's presence in this alignment is particularly striking. Traditionally, India has been seen as a balancing force between East and West, maintaining strong ties with both Russia and the U.S. But recent years have pushed India closer to Moscow and Beijing on some issues, especially as New Delhi sees the West often aligning with Pakistan in ways that complicate India's security concerns. For India, participating in this Beijing summit sends a clear signal. It wants to shape the conversation of the global South and doesn't want to be left behind if new power blocks are formed. India also knows that a world no longer dominated by Washington alone could open space for countries like itself to play a bigger role. For Russia, the motivation is clear. Ever since facing sanctions and international pressure over Ukraine, Moscow has been actively building closer ties with non-Western powers. Putin understands that by aligning with China, India, and even North Korea, he can build a shield against Western isolation. Russia brings military strength, energy resources, and diplomatic experience to the table, making it an indispensable partner in any alliance against Western hegemony. China, of course, is at the heart of it all. Beijing is positioning itself as the leader of an alternative world order, one not based on American terms. From trade to technology, from military power to infrastructure investments, China has been challenging the U.S. on every front. Hosting this meeting in Beijing shows confidence. It is China's way of saying that if Washington wants to set the rules of the game, Beijing is ready to rewrite them. And then there is Donald Trump. Throughout his presidency, Trump made headlines for his bold statements, unpredictable policies, and aggressive stance toward countries like China and North Korea. While he once met Kim Jong Un in a historic summit, relations quickly soured, with Trump reinstating sanctions and threatening military action. For China and Russia, Trump's America became a symbol of unpredictability, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile, but always self-centered. This inconsistency has pushed countries like Russia, China, and even India to think, maybe it is time to reduce dependence on Washington and build their own networks of power. When we look at this gathering through the lens of Muslims worldwide, the story becomes even more relevant. For decades, Muslim nations have often been at the receiving end of wars, sanctions, and political manipulations. From the Middle East to South Asia, policies designed in Washington have deeply affected Muslim lives. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Palestine, and even issues in Kashmir have been shaped by global power rivalries. Now, as the world moves toward a multipolar system, Muslims may finally find alternative allies who are willing to listen to their concerns rather than dictate terms. For example, China has already invested heavily in Muslim-majority countries through its Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure in Pakistan, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Russia, too, has built strong ties with Iran, Turkey, and other Muslim nations. India, despite its internal challenges, represents a major power in South Asia where millions of Muslims live. Even North Korea, though distant, sees itself as an ally of oppressed peoples against Western domination. By coming together, these countries could offer Muslims across the globe more political space, more economic opportunities, and more chances to resist unilateral Western pressure. Of course, it's important to remember that no country is perfect, and every nation in this alliance has its own internal contradictions. But from a global perspective, the shift away from a U.S.-dominated system means there is room for new voices, and Muslims can be part of shaping that conversation if they play their cards wisely. Imagine a world where issues like Palestine are not decided solely in Washington or Brussels, but also debated seriously in Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi. Imagine trade routes, educational exchanges, and diplomatic platforms where Muslim nations have more options and more leverage. Technically speaking, what we are seeing here is the birth of a multipolar order. In international relations theory, this means that instead of one dominant superpower, multiple great powers share influence. The Cold War was bipolar, with the U.S. and the Soviet Union competing for global control. The post-Cold War world was unipolar, dominated by the U.S. Now, the 21st century is shaping up to be multipolar, with China, Russia, India, and other rising powers creating counterbalances. Kim Jong Un's arrival in Beijing is a symbolic addition to this narrative, showing that even smaller but defiant states can play a role in the larger chessboard. For Trump, this is a major challenge. His America First policy was designed to keep the U.S. ahead of everyone else, but in practice, it alienated allies, emboldened rivals, and opened the door for exactly this kind of alignment. Instead of isolating Russia, he pushed it closer to China. Instead of controlling North Korea, he made it look for support elsewhere. Instead of keeping India as a counterbalance to China, he risked driving New Delhi into more flexible partnerships. In politics, perception is everything, and right now the perception is that the U.S. is losing grip while Beijing gains momentum. We also need to analyze the military dimension. Russia and China have been conducting joint military exercises, India has bought advanced weapons from Moscow, and even North Korea has shown interest in military cooperation. This does not mean a formal alliance like NATO, but it does mean that these nations are preparing for scenarios where they might have to counterbalance U.S. influence on the battlefield as well as in the boardroom. Such coordination makes it harder for Washington to pressure them individually because together they form a bloc that is harder to isolate. Economically, the picture is even more compelling. Together, China, Russia, and India represent billions of people and some of the world's fastest-growing markets. By trading in their own currencies, building new infrastructure, and connecting energy pipelines, they reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar. This de-dollarization trend is significant because it limits America's ability to use sanctions as a weapon. For Muslims, this could be especially important. Countries like Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey have all suffered under U.S. sanctions, but if alternative financial systems grow, they will have more breathing space. Diplomatically, the Beijing meeting sends a powerful message. The days of unilateral decisions are fading. Whether it's about climate change, international trade, or security issues, the West can no longer expect everyone else to follow. For Muslim nations, this creates opportunities to engage with new partners who may respect their sovereignty more. It doesn't mean Muslims should blindly trust any new power, but it does mean they now have options, and options are power. Symbolically, Kim Jong Un walking into Beijing alongside leaders from Russia, China, and India is like an announcement to the world that those written off as isolated or irrelevant can no longer be ignored. For the U.S. and Trump in particular, this is an image problem. Washington has long portrayed itself as the ultimate decision-maker, but now pictures from Beijing tell a different story. The world is changing, alliances are shifting, and Trump faces pushback not just from rivals but from a united front of powerful nations.